The Bolivarian constitution requires the president to hold an annual speech in front of the National Assembly within 10 days of the beginning of the parliamentary year. Venezuela's president took a look back and emphasized economic recovery despite the U.S. sanctions regime.
El crecimiento de la economía.
Regarding economic growth, according to already consolidated data and the preliminary projection of the central bank, it is that the growth of the economy in Venezuela 2024 exceeded 9% of the gross domestic product.
Looking forward, the president announced new measures, such as the establishment of a new Ministry of Foreign Trade, simplifying bureaucratic processes for exports, and the introduction of a digital Venezuelan currency. Reforms in economy will be accompanied by those in the constitution, Maduro said, and acted.
Decidido firmar aquí en este acto la creación.
I have decided to sign here, in this event, the creation of the National, Unitary and Inclusive Commission for Constitutional Reform.
Usually, the speech is held in the National Assembly, but Maduro spoke in the cultural center of teleSUR in Caracas, joined by thousands, a continuation of taking the presidential oath both in the parliament and later with the people.
Así que preparémonos.
So let us get prepared so that all 38 parties nominate their candidates, and very soon we will be in democratic normality, electing deputies, governors, legislators, mayors and municipality council members.
Constitutional reform, elections and the normal democratic life. For some observers, the president's main message was an invitation.
We are going to invest all our money that we produce in the petroleum industry, in the agriculture industry, in the benefits and the happiness of our people. That's about, it is socialism about. So this message is very illustrating for the people in Venezuela, that we have to get together and get united, you know, because we are all Venezuelan people.
In his annual speech to the nation, President Maduro constructed bridges from the past to the future, from description to action, from government to opposition, and from the presidency to the people. Yunus Soner, teleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
And we go now to London, as activists from the Revolutionary Communist Group and allied organizations march on Wednesday to the headquarters of The Guardian newspaper to protest the media manipulation of the Global South anti-imperialist struggles. Carrying flags from Venezuela, Palestine and Cuba, demonstrators denounced the newspaper's misrepresentation of the information, particularly pertaining the undermining of struggles that stand against the British imperialist interests, such as the coverage of Israel's genocide in Gaza. In this context, activists also condemned the media treatment of the January 10th presidential inauguration in Venezuela, where thousands went to the streets in support of the democratically elected President Nicolás Maduro.
The media, but you can see really clearly why when you look at Venezuela. Do you know that in the Bank of England, just a few miles from here, the Bank of England has stolen over $1 billion of Venezuelans' gold. $1 billion of Venezuelans' gold. Because they say that they don't recognize the elected government of Nicolás Maduro. They've been saying that since 2018. And instead of reporting the truth about Venezuela, the thousands of people who were out on the streets, the workers, the campesinos, the women, the grandparents, the youth, all of those people, the indigenous people, they were out on the streets, the trade unionists, they were supporting the inauguration of Nicolás Maduro. They were supporting the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution, and they were not covered in the pages of The Guardian, nor the BBC, because for The Guardian and the BBC, the working class, the poor, the people of Venezuela are invisible. Well, it's our duty to make them visible, to tell the truth about what is happening in Venezuela.
And to go further into this topic, We are now joined by Cassius J. Kalani, member of the Revolutionary Communist Group, who held the protest we were just seeing on screen from London. Hello, Cassius, and thank you for joining us here in From the South.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited today.
Okay, so Cassius, of course, tell us why hold this protest action in front of the Guardian media outlet?
Absolutely. There's been many protests outside media news outlets, but we've chosen The Guardian. It likes to present itself as a liberal and very respectable outlet, appealing to progressives within the working class. You know, it says it's radical and independent and almost like an underdog against the larger media outlets. But this is a complete lie. It is owned by the Scott Trust Limited, which is worth £1 billion. It has a very large revenue of £250 million. And the role it plays is manufacturing that consent for the imperialist narrative against Palestine, for example. It frequently tries to bring into doubt the number of casualties by referring to hospitals as Hamas-run health ministries. It paints the Palestinian people as starving for no reason and completely omits the Israeli starvation of them. And when it comes to Venezuela as well, for example, as my comrade said in the video, it completely erases the voices of those who are in full support of Maduro, and it only buys into the opposition and their narrative of what is happening in Venezuela. And that is all in the interest of British imperialism. So that is why we target The Guardian. It is a sly fox that is trying to trick people who believe themselves to be quite left or liberal into supporting British imperialism.
Now, Cassius, we've been seeing images of demonstrators in the protest holding Cuban, Palestinian, Venezuelan flags, and Venezuela in particular has been on the media spotlight for the past days in what analysts have described as an interference media campaign. Why do you think that outlets such as The Guardian, who present themselves as Western liberal, allegedly friends of free speech and press, target Venezuela in these ways, in which so many cases are just outright twisting reality? Why do you think that this happens?
Absolutely. The Guardian is in full support of British imperialism. Where it draws its money from is that slightly better off section of the working class who still think they're progressive. And as a result, they will always take that narrative, but try to make it somewhat nicer. So we've seen a complete slew of lies against Venezuela. Their main writer on this, Tom Phillips, is the chief propagandist, and he's come up with some absolutely, ridiculous things. He keeps quoting the fabricated election results from the opposition party in Venezuela, again exaggerates the tiny number of counter-protesters. He mentions the bounty placed on Maduro as if it's a normal thing, that a foreign elected head of state can have a bounty placed against him, and then makes this sweeping claim that all the Venezuelans are against Maduro, and that because they're such a liberal and respectable media outlet, that they are concerned about the democracy in Venezuela, because this comes from a very, respectable moral standpoint. And because it might resonate with some progressive people within the very large Palestine movement, they are able to then draw more people into being completely against Maduro. And of course, their material interest in doing that. They maintain their followers, they maintain their donations, and they support British imperialism in maintaining its grip of Venezuela's gold and squeezing Venezuela's revolution. I mean, we've seen recently David Lammy has placed 15 fresh sanctions on the Venezuelan people, and it's through outlets such as The Guardian that manufacture consent for that and display a warped narrative that prevents people from standing in solidarity, not just with Palestine, but also with Venezuela.
So in the face of what we are saying and what you were just describing, I wanted to ask you, in the face of this media coverage from these big media outlets from particularly Western nations, what can be done to improve the world coverage and processes such as the ones in Venezuela and Cuba, maybe strengthen smaller or media outlets linked to communities? What is your take on that?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important question. What can be done to strengthen that is, first of all, point out the very obvious lies within the media news coverage of Palestine. I think due to the access of social media, due to the rise of more independent news, a lot of people have realized that the narrative is completely skewed and in complete favor of Israel, which serves the interests of Western imperialism. Even the Maccabi Tel Aviv football fans who went to that football game in the Netherlands, even football fans were able to recognize, hang on, lots of football fans go around the world, cause trouble, get beaten up. And, the media acts like that's normal, which it is. But when it comes to Israeli settlers going abroad to a football game, doing the same thing, they get special treatment. So I think a lot of people are waking up to this coverage. And what our job as anti-imperialists is to do is to make sure that the people who are waking up to this have the same standard when it comes to other anti-imperialist struggles across the world. It's between linking those. A lot of people who came to our protest yesterday didn't really know much about Venezuela, but that is why it's so important to draw the links. The same way the imperialists give a completely skewed view of Palestine in favor of Israel is the same way they completely listen to the opposition in Venezuela and in complete contradiction and opposition to the Bolivarian revolution. So we are encouraging activists on the ground in Britain to join us at these Guardian protests and maybe to bring up other areas where the media is lying. For example, in Congo, in Sudan, these are just shown as humanitarian crises, or for example, the Alliance of Sahel States in West Africa. There is very, imperialist coverage over that. So if we can draw these links together, we can build greater solidarity and be in complete cooperation against British imperialism on our soil.
Now, Cassius, I would like to ask you about another pressing issue of the week. Of course, after 15 months of an ongoing genocide in Gaza, finally a ceasefire deal has been announced, supposedly to begin on Sunday. And with this, a new stage in the situation in the region. Now the focus will be to ensure that the terms of these agreements are kept and the human rights of Palestinians respected, as millions wait to return home and access also basic goods and services. What do you think that political, social organizations such as yours and around the world ought to do in this context to continue supporting the Palestinian struggle?
I think the first thing that we should all have learned is that you cannot trust Israel's words. They say there's a ceasefire in place at the moment. It's been agreed in principle. It has not been carried out in practice. And that means we should be continuing to put pressure on Israel. This is a settler colonial outpost. We see people marching from A to B weekly saying free Palestine. Well, we should know that a ceasefire does not necessitate the freedom of Palestine. A ceasefire in practice might see limited aggression, as we've seen with past anti-colonial and anti-imperialist struggles. But that does not mean that aid can be blocked. That does not mean that more settlements cannot be built. So I think the most important thing is to attack the interests of the ruling class in Britain, specifically for us here. We see how the banks are bankrolling the genocide, are providing loans and underwriting in the billions. For example, Barclays Bank is a large contributor of that to a variety of weapon systems. So I think to ensure this ceasefire is in place, we must completely cut off trade with Israel. We must be campaigning for sanctions, because there can be no ceasefire while a genocidal and apartheid state is being bankrolled and supplied with weapons. It's completely contradictory.
Exactly, that was very clear. And I thank you, Cassius, once again for joining us and allowing us to further understand these topics.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
That was Cassius J. Kalani of the Revolutionary Communist Group in London on the protest they held along the other organizations against the Western media campaign targeting global South nations such as Venezuela.